And with that, I am very excited to introduce our next speaker. Welcome Anne Matthey, who is joining us from London, England. We were able to accompany her on her train ride into town the other day, and it just really highlights the global spirit of this topic. And as sad as we are that we're not all able to be together in Markdale in the tent personally with everyone, there is an opportunity by doing it virtually to just have participation from all over the globe. You know, we've seen it with Terry in Toronto and Archana in India, and now we have Anne with us from the UK. So we are really, really excited about that. Anne follows right along the theme of sharing her personal story and putting it into a larger context related to Kundalini. In addition to what she's sharing with us in her biography, it was interesting for me to chat a bit back and forth with Anne, and a fascinating story where she has traveled on her motorbike through India, especially through the Himalayas, when she was in her early 20s, exploring ancient sacred sites. So even that early, she was already interested in the topic. She's currently studying Sanskrit and exploring the Buddhist sutras and Tantric texts. She is working with yoga. She is trained in a Japanese martial arts called Nimpo for the past 8 years. And interesting to relate to the comment or the question that came in earlier about hereditary influences of Kundalini. Her father also went through an intense awakening around 30 years ago, or when he was in his 30s in Japan. And through connections with Dr. Motoyama, who was a Zen priest and scientist who studied Kundalini, was able to help him through that. So again, fascinating life story, and we really, really look forward to your talk. And welcome. Kundalini, the lived experience, psychology, and Eastern metaphysics. Welcome, Anne, and I will give you a heads up in about 20 minutes, and we'll see how many questions we have at that time.
Great. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? All good? Great. First, thank you so much for having me, ICR. I feel very honored to be here. And Archana, thank you for sharing such a deep and personal experience. I was really moved by that. And Terry, that was amazing. I felt a lump in my throat when you spoke of Gopi Krishna's activism. And this is very much my intention behind sharing this information and studying and researching this. For me, Kundalini is the evolutionary process of humankind for society and for human biology. So my area of research is very much getting down to the nitty-gritty and the technical side of what is actually happening. My reason for this is to normalize this into society, to bring this into our medical maps, to bring this into our psychological frameworks. Unfortunately, in interviewing many people and their Kundalini experiences, some people have been through a hell of a time and even medicated and diagnosed with mania or mental illness. So my mission is to bring this into awareness, but also merge frameworks, especially from Eastern traditions. They have a very rich psychological framework which holds this experience and guides people towards its full fruition. So this is really what my talk is about. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of Kundalini and the yogic body and the subtle body. And hopefully this will bring a framework into the experience itself. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation that goes along with the talk. Hopefully this works. Okay, so Kundalini, the lived experience, psychology and metaphysics. I'm going to put a timer on so I don't go over. Okay, so first of all, Kundalini, its purpose is to move the individual towards psychic wholeness and with one's body in the rest of the universe. So I'm just going to talk about some of the experiences that happen from Kundalini. These are some experiences I've interviewed with people, some experiences my father relayed to me, and some experiences I've had myself. So this is an amalgamation of lots of direct experience of Kundalini. Now, it can manifest in a number of different ways. Classically is the light moving up the spine, like we have heard from Gopi Krishna's experiences. There are some preliminary experiences which can happen, which enable this central column rising of Kundalini to happen. And typically Kriyas are one of those experiences. So a strong or sudden movement of the body. So as if the body moves spontaneously on its own. People are known to have gone into yoga positions without ever having done yoga, or like a strong force moving the limbs, sometimes to such a refined degree that mudras are happening. Sometimes when the mudras are happening, an attitude, a bhavana, manifests as if possession of a deity. Within the tradition of the tantric texts, this is how they would receive or understand this experience to be. So the other experiences, we can have a strong devotion, devotion to the point where the heart feels like it's lifting up out of the body. Spontaneous mantra, a sound that can come out of the mouth, which is more than just normal speech. It's like an intonement that vibrates through the whole body. Electricity moving through the fingers and the body. Shaking or rupturing of this energy that boils from very deep within. These are just some of the experiences. Spontaneous expressions of yoga can come to the bottom right picture is Vajroli Mudra. It's a yogic practice where you retract the perineum and that lifts Kundalini up the spine. This can happen spontaneously, as well as bandhas, drawing in the prana and moving it through will around the body. This again can happen spontaneously. The eyes rolling around the head, the prana moving the muscles in the body so that the body can clear its pathways for Kundalini to move to its appropriate channels. So these experiences are very strange and out there and can be a bit alarming for people when they move through a spontaneous preliminary experience. Now, what I want to talk about is a framework. So why do these experiences happen? What's the psychology behind this? And what is happening in the body on a metaphysical level, on a subtle body level? And how does this interact with the physical? So let's talk about Laya Yoga first. This is essentially what is happening when Kundalini ascends the spine. As I go through the talk, I will relay scripture and text to direct experience, either through people I've interviewed or myself or my fathers. So liberation is the reverse process of manifestation. So we are dissolving back into nothing. This is the ascension of Kundalini. So it can be very disturbing when this happens because the psychological process starts to break apart. Everything that you think you are starts to fall apart. And this can be very scary. It's like having the ego ripped out from under your feet and there's an abyss of nothing. So this is where the anxiety can come in if there is a lack of understanding about what is happening in the process. So essentially, the experience is like a burning up of karma, of residue. And I will explain all of this. I'll unpack this throughout the talk. So why do we need a metaphysical framework to understand the Kundalini phenomena? Now, like I said, these experiences can cause a lot of anxiety. To relay this to my father, he didn't realize what was happening and it was very intense. The psychological unfolding as you dissolve back into nothing can be very scary, as well as the deep-seated unconscious psychological knots as they arise to the surface of your consciousness in a very powerful way. This is very alarming. And of course, our Western medical or psychiatry doesn't really understand what's happening in this process. Carl Jung did bring a lot of this over to the West, but we're still trying to unpack what's really happening. So by giving this experience a framework, as based on the insights of our previous meditation masters, we can get a clearer picture of what's happening. and which allows a sense of ease as we move through this process. So essentially, usually the experience abates over time once right view sets in, once an insight and awareness into the nature of reality sets in through direct experience, then the intensity of the Kundalini experience settles. This is commonly experienced. So what I'm going to present to you today is a pooling together of common ideas that have developed over time throughout history. I'm going to look at some famous texts from as early as the Vedas, and practices and insights often built upon the discovery of previous masters. So what we're looking at here, I'm just going to present this through the eyes of a tradition. Okay, so the nature of reality doesn't change, but the lens through which we view Kundalini will change as we evolve scientifically, as cultures change, as events in culture change our perception of reality. So I'm deeply fascinated by the Indian continent and its history of looking at this phenomenon over the past 3,000 years. It's maintained a dialogue throughout 3,000 years of looking at the nature of reality through direct experience and allowing or creating traditions and pathways for this Kundalini experience to unfold. And it's been given many names and it has many paths from which to do this. So I'm certainly not saying this is the right way to go. I'm just going to demonstrate which is a way. So just briefly, Kundalini and its development. So I come from, I mean, in my early years, I was very much devoted to this. So I suppose devotion would be my core. However, over the years, I've started to study this and unpack this from many different disciplines, one of which is the scholarly tradition. So I'll be looking at texts. Hopefully I can make this, bring it to life. So when we look at the Vedas, we have, this is the earliest kind of understanding or written work that we have. Obviously the Vedas weren't written down, but what we see in the Rig Veda is a reverence to the wandering Muni. The devotion and the bliss from this Muni was worshipped by people. People wanted to know, what is this divine man? What does he behold? What is he seeing? What is he experiencing? And from this, the path has emerged and developed and unfolded. Here is a brief list of some scripture which has been unpacked by James Manson, a scholar from SOAS, and Mark Singleton in their book, The Roots of Yoga. I'm going to be looking at a few of these just as a quick or very brief skip through history. We start with the Vedas, and that was very much about society, the Vedic fire, and understanding what was the warp and the weft of the universe, what was the nature of our reality, in very early ritual and tradition, bringing people together and eliminating fear. As we move into the area of Upanishads, we start to have more meditative practices develop. So there is an awareness of the subtle body. There is a mechanism that happens which awakens an individual to a deeper insight into the nature of reality. The Mahabharata. So the Upanishads, people went to the forest to meditate. The Mahabharata is all about bringing people back into society. People have a duty to give to society, to bring to the table, to improve society, karma yoga. This was very much what the Mahabharata was about, or the Bhagavad Gita. When we get to the 6th century, we start to see a much more detailed development of the subtle body in the Tantric era. So this is when we really first start to see the word Kundalini. As we move into the 11th century, we start having Hatha yoga techniques, more forceful practices, incorporating some of the old Tantric techniques and bringing them into physical practices. And this really takes us to present time. That was such a brief run through. But what I do want to talk about is Kundalini and metaphysics. So Sankhya Philosophy. This is very much the philosophy which underpins most Indian traditions. And this is an insight into the nature of reality. What is the nature of consciousness? What is the nature of this body? And how is this body connected to our greater universe? So Sankhya philosophy really does sum this up. Tantra rests on these principles. Later Buddhism rests on these principles. The Buddha himself learned his techniques based on early Sankhya. So it really is a very important philosophy. So to break it down, Sankhya is a dual philosophy. We have consciousness, just awareness itself. And that's Purusha or Shiva in the Tantric tradition. And then we have matter, everything that's physical. Even a thought, an emotion is considered physical. On a more subtle vibration, but it's still physical, this is Prakriti, this is Shakti. So all manifest materiality, all action, all attraction, repulsion, this is all Shakti, all Prakriti. Everything in our known universe is Prakriti. Purusha is just consciousness, just pure awareness. So what we are beginning to understand in quantum physics is that consciousness is everywhere. So we've got real popular physicists like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff who are looking at consciousness like the driving force behind physical manifestation of life. So this is really coming about in quantum physics, or understanding of the nature of reality involving consciousness. Eugene Wigner, he explores consciousness as a wave function which collapses as soon as it interacts with consciousness. So these are very similar ideas to our early Sankhya philosophers, and I'm going to unpack that. So we have the Tatwas, Prana, Shakti, and Kundalini. This is what I'm going to discuss. So this is the order of creation. I'm going to talk about Prana and Shakti. These are very synonymous terms which overlap in many ways, and I'm going to explain how and why and when they separate. So now, David Bohm and Paul Dirac, they talk about quantum fields like everything is an electromagnetic wave interacting with each other in an undivided wholeness. So Bohm said that the brain had very deep levels of hardwiring, so that mirror the fundamental frameworks in the universe. So our brains mirror the nature of reality and the unfolding nature of our universe. This is our psychology very much maps onto the universe and the way it unfolds into manifest physical reality. So now we have consciousness, but this matter, the matter that is all things manifest, the creatrix, everything that exists, is made up from gunas. So Prakriti is also guna, okay? So guna is all of creation. Prakriti divides into 3 gunas, so sattva, tamas, and rajas. These are like forces that move through the universe, interacting, co-creating, and creating. So sattva, rajas, tamas. Sattva is like an effervescent lightness that holds structure. Rajas is the energy and the fire that gets things moving, that gets things interacting, and that gets the chemical reaction to happen. Tamas is the settling, is the solidifying, is bringing structure and form into permanence. These are always interacting with each other. SK is Samkhya Karika, which is a text which describes this philosophy. So prana is like a fabric through the whole universe, through which this energy rides upon, and through which these gunas make everything manifest. So prana is there from the beginning. Now in the system of yoga, we want to separate consciousness from prakriti, from shakti. So they interlace with each other. Consciousness brings an aliveness to prakriti, to the gunas. It's not alive. Consciousness makes that alive. This is in the philosophy of Sankhya. Now, as a yogini or a yogi, we want to untangle that. This is the process of the Kundalini awakening. This is what is happening. It's an untangling of the consciousness from matter. And that's what the psychological breakdown is often seen to be. So just a little map. Purusha is the first thing that ever existed, just pure consciousness. And from that we have unmanifest prakriti, which is just potential energy. And this potential energy turns into the three gunas. These three gunas start to move, and the first one to take action is sattva guna, and then from this buddhi is created. Now buddhi is like a the first reflection of consciousness. It's an awareness of consciousness itself. It's like a mirror against consciousness. That's all it is. It's an awareness of consciousness. From buddhi, ahamkara created. So these tatwas, these principal elements, are the components that make up the human being. And I'll explain why this is relevant to Kundalini. So the ahamkara starts to form, the gunas start to interplay with each other, creating more form, more substance. The mahat to the ahamkara. Ahamkara is the I maker. There's now something going, oh, I'm me and I'm separate from consciousness. I am a separate thing, I and I. The gunas continue to interact. And now more tamasic elements. Remember, the solidifying elements come into play, where sounds are created, objects of touch are created, forms, tastes, smells, as well as the function of the eye consciousness, the function of listening, the nose, skin, tongue. All of our sensory organs of perception form through the interaction of these three gunas. And of course, the 5 Mahabhutas, very, very important in ritual, in Buddhism, in Tantra, in Yoga. The Mahabhutas are the fundamental parts. Can't break them down any further unless you're a Buddhist and everything dissolves, or a Tantric. And the Tantrics took this further. So we spoke about a dual philosophy, two separate things, consciousness and Purusha and Prakriti. The Tantrics took this further into complete disillusion, into everything. So there are levels beyond the states of consciousness, and these are determined through people's direct experience in meditative states, where more parts of the self fall away. So more parts of the ego begin to dissolve. You can get to very high states of samadhi, however, there is still an essence of the I. So the Tantrics, which very similar to Buddhists, took it to the point of annihilation. This is Kundalini in her full expression. So let's have a look at the psychology. What's happening in the mind that creates all of this thought stuff and the experience of dissolving into everything. Now, our 25 tattvas in the Sankhya tradition, the components of the self, the manas, the buddhi, ahankara, the jnanendriyas, the karmendriyas, the tanmatras, the pancha mahabhutas. These are all the 25 principal parts of the self. Now, the guna prana is constantly flowing through us, constantly flowing through us. The gunas that ride the waves of prana, sattva, rajas, tamas, are constantly moving through our organs of perception, influencing what we see, feel, touch, and taste. So if I'm looking at a tree and I have sattva guna flowing through my eyes, then I'm going to see the tree as bright, crisp, clear, structured. If I have tamas guna moving through my eyes, I'm going to see the decay. I'm going to see the inertness in that tree, maybe the death or the decomposition. If there's a rajasic element, I will see its vividity, its aliveness. So we are constantly influenced by the gunas moving through our sensory organs. Now, this interaction between looking and seeing the object will create the manas. Manas will move, the mind will move and create thought forms. Thought forms are actual things that exist on a vibratory level, according to the Tantrics and the Yogics, and they exist in our system. They move through our system. The repeated action of looking at something and knowing, oh, this is a cup, this is a tree, this is a phone, that creates an idea, and that creates a samskara, a pattern of thought and a behavior. So this is the psychology through which we build up our whole reality. Now, this isn't real. It's simply projection upon projection of the gunas, layering and layering upon each other, giving us the illusion that it's real. So we have a thought, a subtle projection placed upon another subtle projection. This keeps happening and it gets more and more tamasic in the mind. And this causes attachments and aversions. So we start to cling on to reality. So these are just Shakti. This is just the forces of the universe. This isn't really, this is not a personal thing. So our suffering isn't a personal thing. It's just the nature of the mind unfolding itself. This is what she does. This is her unfolding nature. And it's up to us to come out of that.
And I'm just going to jump in here. We're probably about 10 minutes away. There's no questions right now.
Okay.
So if anyone has questions for Anne, please send them in quickly.
Sure.
But you just keep on going.
I'm going to whiz through then. Okay, so this interchange, it causes this tamasic behavior, and this can build up upon the person. It can function like ignorance. They call ignorance in this tradition is like a fog. It rests over the mind, and it can get pretty heavy, and life can get pretty real. And this is when we need to remove this tamasic buildup. Kundalini will do that for you, whether you like it or not. She'll take you through these extraordinary, very deep, like as if you're going through psychotherapy, bringing up your deep-rooted pains, hurts. All of that stuff comes to the surface, which is hard and intense, but it passes. So what we have from this unfolding of the Tatwas, from the most subtle principle to the most physical, we have the Pancha Koshas. Now, this is much earlier from the Taittiriya Upanishads. These are the layers of our reality, the layers of our existence. Now, I just want to backtrack a bit, and this is very important. I feel is that the sattvic attitudes are generosity and kindness and love. These are very light attitudes, and this is what will remove the tamasic nature of the mind. So in all traditions, well, most traditions, morality is the fundamental and the foundation part of any practice that you embark on is cultivating a sattvic mind, cultivating sattvic action, so that we can remove the tamas from psychology. So back to the Pancha Koshas. These are the sheaths, the interpenetrating layers of Prakriti, from the most subtle, the Anandamaya Kosha, to the most solid, the physical body. Now Kundalini can only really, she's free in Anandamaya Kosha. She will move wherever she pleases. However, she only can really move through particular pathways as we move into the more gross flesh, or even the more subtle Pranamaya Kosha, the nadis, the channels that move through our system. These are kind of pathways of energy through which Kundalini can move through, or prana can move through. And on the prana rides thoughts. So I'm going to really talk about Pranamaya Kosha in more detail here. Because this is what yoga, this is where practice has a direct effect on, so that Kundalini can move into the central channel. Now, we have a lot of people who have a spontaneous awakening, but often they're not full awakening. So sometimes you can get a big wake-up call, but then we go back into a tamasic natured mind, which can just go on for 20 years or until you die. So we need to walk a path. We need to find a way to bring this prana into the central channel. For very few instances or rare cases, this does naturally happen, and the mind sees the nature of reality and there's liberation. But for the most of us, we've got to work. So, how am I doing for time? Okay, so
you've got about 9 minutes. We have one question.
Right. Okay.
And nine minutes to closing.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go into the anatomy of Kundalini now. Okay. This, now she is very much physical. So she will move, you will experience her in a sensory experience in the nervous system in many ways. The way I'm going to talk about is when she moves into the central channel, the canalis centralis. This is where there is actually a very fine nerve fiber which runs through the central column, the centralis, canalis centralis. This is where Kundalini moves to. It's also known as Brahmanadi on a more subtle level. Now, at the very base, there is a bundle of nerves between the anus and the reproductive organs. And these is like covered in membranes, and it moves through the whole nervous system. In the scripture, they call it Kunda, and this is where all the nadis branch out from throughout the body. Now, this is where our vital energy moves around the body as well. So when Kundalini is moving throughout the nadis, it's when we're alive, living normal life and interacting with a physical plane. When she moves into the central canal, a different experience happens. The prana moves away from all of the organs and it moves into the central column. Now, there are 3 layers to this central column. The Vajrini, Sushumna, or Meridanda, as it's sometimes called. The Shichrini, otherwise known as Brahmanadi, is the pathway which takes Kundalini to the part of the brain, I'll show you in more detail, which releases Amrita. There's a variety of different types of awakenings that happen here. There's the slow ascent. When the ascent is slow, chakras can be activated as they move up. So when a chakra is activated, within this chakra is bound up prakriti, coiling spirit into matter. When there's a burst of energy that moves through that chakra, the spirit and the matter uncoils, and this is when we can separate ourselves from attachments to life. So the slow ascent, that's when people develop more siddhi, more ability to kind of access different functions of the mind. The fast ascent kind of bypasses this. So I'm going to skip the physiological part of this and move to the subtle body, because I think this is quite interesting.
We've got 2 questions for you now.
Oh, okay. So when just let me know when and then
let's go through this, and then I think we'll probably have to move over to taking the questions.
Great, sure thing. Okay, so this is I'm going to talk about Ida and Pingala because they're very important nadis and they govern the mechanism of Kundalini. So I'm going to talk about Ida first. So Ida is like lunar drops. Now, Ida carries Bindu. Now, if we're to think of prana as the energy which carries all of manifest principles and helps it unfold, Bindu, otherwise known as rasa, is like a liquid that allows the biological functions to continue to reproduce. So rasa is synonymous with semen or menstrual fluid, which creates life. When it moves into the central channel, it's enlightenment. So these terms are synonymous in yogic and tantric texts. Now, Bindu is governed by the moon, by the waxing and the waning of the moon. It fills up when the moon is full and it decreases when the moon wanes. Bindu moves into Ida and it nourishes the body. So I'm talking about a text called the Amrita Siddha, which is a very important root text for Vajrayana Buddhism and Hatha Yoga and Tantra. It comes from Tantra. The Bindu nourishes the body. This is the lunar essence. It gives vitality and energy and consciousness to the body. It moves through the nadis, through Ida channel. Pingala is solar. So in Manipura chakra, we get our energy from the sun. We get our solar energy. This is our the thing that makes us interact with life. It makes us grow old and it makes us die. So this is like the function that keeps us being birthed and reborn is this solar energy. This solar energy consumes bindu as it moves through the system. Now, when you meditate, or when you still the mind, the prana stops flowing around the body. If you can get a really good samadhi, a really still mind, the senses start to shut down and the prana moves into the central channel. So what's happening is the solar energy, which is normally consuming bindu around the body, will stop, and it will move, and it will stay still, and it connects with bindu in the base, the Medudanda, and it ignites. They melt each other. So there's a different texts will say slightly different things about what is actually technically happening in the central channel, but it's a little bit like the solar energy spins inside Brahmanadi, and the lunar energy kind of encases over that, spinning around it. So the solar energy melts the bindu, and that's what creates a pathway which allows the bliss to overflow through the body. There was a whole neurological thing that happens. So I've done some really interesting research and looking at what's actually going on in an MRI when someone's in samadhi. Lee Brassington, if you ever get a chance, check out his very Buddhist practices, early Buddhist practices on samadhi, but it's very interesting what he talks about. So now when, if Kundalini goes into the central channel, Brahmanadi, then it moves up and it pierces. So Kundalini is like a sound. She encompasses the Om. She's like a powerful mantra that pierces the Lalana chakra, which is right by the ovula. When she gets through that chakra, a mechanism happens. A bindu releases the bindu, but instead of going into Ida Nadi, it goes into the Lalana chakra, and that's where it turns into a kind of liquid or an elixir which you can consume, and it drips down the throat as a Amrita, what it's called. There's a very detailed description about it in the Amrita Siddha and many texts. And the yogi is supposed to consume. There's different texts. There's yogic practices where you bring the tongue back. There's all kinds of different things. Ideally, with a full awakening, you don't do anything, you just let it dissolve. But this is with a very good, strong samadhi. Now, this, let's see, this Amrita, which floods the body, or it moves into the body, kind of halts the aging process, because solar energy is no longer being consumed by Ida. I'm sorry, the solar energy is no longer consuming bindu in Ida. It's in the central channel. So that's why you see the monks, when they die in samadhi, their bodies don't really decay, because the solar energy isn't really spilling out. It's kept in the central channel. The Vishuddhi chakra is a very important part of this. Sorry, I don't have time to go into all of the details of how it affects the glandular system, but there is a way in which it affects the glandular system, which is very interesting. The Vishuddhi chakra has 16 petals, which represents the 16 phases of the moon. So if Kundalini can activate the Vishuddhi chakra, then it purifies the Amrita so that it can move into the ovula, so it can move into the Lalana chakra. And then that's when you get the elixir or the Amrita. So it's very important. This also governs the thyroid gland as well. Okay, I should probably.
I know we're probably going to have to move over to the questions.
Let's go. Yeah.
Are you good for questions, or do you have any one closing?
Totally. Well, okay. So my closing on this, it's just so much to say about, is how connected we are to the actual sun and the moon. I did a lot of research on what's the biological connection to the moon. We have lunar gravitational sensitive cells in our glands which are affected by the full moon. I've read loads of studies about more vitality on a full moon. We are directly connected to our lunar and our solar cycles in terms of the building up of Amrita and the releasing of Amrita. So they talk about equinoxes in the yogic calendar as being very important, because there is a balance of Ida and Pingala. Therefore, she can move into the central channel. So I was finished with that. And I apologize. That was quite, I kind of crammed a lot into that half an hour and probably need to unpack those little sections a lot more. But yeah, I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. I feel totally overwhelmed. I was trying to catch up 20 minutes ago, but other people had really good questions for you, so maybe I can pose them. How long do heat sensations caused by Kundalini awakening last? And are there any ways of relieving the symptoms?
Of heat through the central column or through the body? Well, I suppose, well, okay, I'll talk about relieving those symptoms. There are yogic practices, which Shitali, which cools the breath, and Kundalini is prana, it is the breath. So, I mean, there's a lot of people say, so that cools the prana in the body. But I mean, Kundalini is very intelligent. Sometimes you just have to sit her out and she does what she's going to do. And it might not be fun for some parts of it, but I don't know about manipulating it with yogic practices. I think it's a really intense, powerful process that she kind of knows what to do with you, which is going to be very different based on your karma and based on your body, because your karma is physical in your body. So it will move and do different things to individuals based on where your blockages are, or where we all have it. And we all build different psychological things throughout our lives. So she's gonna push and move and unknot people in different ways. But the heat, I don't know, I mean, I would say let it do its thing. I understand it's very hard for some people because it can be quite torturous or very intense sensations. Cold showers, swim in the sea, I would say. Go back to Mother Nature, she's got you.
Well, that's very good. And we have one last question for you, Anne. Is there a possibility that Kundalini rises through solar channel instead of the central channel?
Yes, yes. So I understand that Gopi Krishna's experience, so it can either go through Ida or Pingala. So when it goes into Ida, so I read a thing about Gopi Krishna, his experience, and this is what can happen when people have a very tormented experience, is that the prana moves into Ida, and it's like you live out your subconscious. So it's like a waking dream. Sometimes you can see or hallucinate demons. And this is when the Kundalini is in Ida. Now, Gopi Krishna, I understand, had a very strong meditation practice before the experience happened. So he was able to bring Kundalini into the central channel by stilling his mind, by keeping his mind still. When it goes into the solar channel, I mean, I haven't heard of any experiences that would maybe correlate this now, and even Gopi Krishna only says he thinks it might have gone into Ida. So it's very difficult to say what the experience is from. So I'd love to hear from anyone if they've had a direct experience with that particularly. But it can be, I would associate it with thyroid, hyperthyroidism, overactive energy, too much, just going, and then burnout. Yeah, the idea is to bring it into the central channel. But when we're in a normal state of consciousness, it is in the solar channel.
Thank you, Anne. I think we are all stimulated in awe, slightly overwhelmed with all the information, but mostly stimulated.
Good.
Thank you so much for sharing your talk with us and your wealth of information.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope it wasn't too much overload, but thank you so much for having me.
We'll digest it in little bits and pieces, no doubt. And all of the recordings will be posted on our ICR website, probably one a week, and through the speakers you can probably also touch base with them direct if you have more questions.